Well, welcome to Matrix webinar series, Database Decision Making, the Impact on Agency Practice and Performance. My name is Andrea Richardson, and we are here today with Lisa Paglia. Got into an introduction with Lisa, and we're going to learn more about database decision making, finding the data that matters the most. So my name is Andrea Richardson. I'm an advocate, consultant, and facilitator with 26 years of experience working in human services with 13 in child welfare. I work with InfoMatrix as a subject matter expert and trainer. And my focus is around practice and policy, focused around child welfare, system integration, social change, and technology implementation that improves the outcomes of children and families. InfoMatrix has a long history of supportive human service practice by focusing on the needs of end users and ensuring that they have the tools to make a positive impact on children and family outcomes. Our motto is to promote a power of information by creating solutions that are developed by social workers for social workers. In part one of our series, Database Decision Making, It's More Than Just the Numbers, we discussed what human services administrators are calling the most effective way to connect to stakeholders and measure progress. We also reviewed real examples from the field where database decision making was used to make the changes that mattered. We reviewed how database decision making was being used to dispel some common assumptions we often see in practice, and we examined the 6 components of the database decision-making strategy and how you could begin to implement it right away. We also began to create an implementation plan by asking participants to focus on one area that they wanted to know more about, like a trend area or an area that was not working as expected. And you should be able to find for those of you who attended last time, or for those of you who are attending for the first time this session, that should be in your supplemental handouts. So our learning objectives for today are to learn about how you can evaluate the data that you are currently collecting and identify the data that you need. We're going to hear about some case examples where database decision making had an effect on organizational practice. We're going to learn about how Lackawanna County Children and Youth Services is using their data to inform practice outcomes, professional development, and increase the motivation of their team. And we'll also determine the resources necessary in making the strategy work for your team. As a reminder, our webinar today is going to be taped. It'll run for about an hour, and a link will be emailed out to participants after the webinar today. But as we begin, please feel free to get out your implementation plan, take some notes, work out your next steps. But let's move on to introducing our speaker today. So today I am with Lisa Paglia. Welcome, 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 Lisa. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you, Andrea. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. So Lisa is a performance measurement specialist in the QA department at Lackawanna County Office Social Service Research and Development. She leads the agency program evaluation and monitoring, the CQI efforts that they have, and also the operations and development of agency's case management system. You have 20 years experience working in human services, with a focus on trauma-informed care and attachment theory, and you have a BA for professional studies in law and justice from Rowan University and a master's in social work from Marywood University. So again, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So a little bit about Lackawanna County. For those of you who may not be familiar with the county itself, they are located in the northeast region of Pennsylvania. They're a third-class county with a population of around 214,000. They experience about close to 4,000 referrals over the course of a year. That was the number from 2019. Have approximately 100 total staff. And for those of us who like to travel around the counties and see some cool things, it's the home of the Trolley Museum, television's The Office, and they have a vibrant art scene and many parks, trails, and preserves. So if you've never been to Lackawanna County, you should get up there. It's really pretty.
Well, thank you, especially this time of year with all the fall foliage.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Real nice.
Yeah. So we're going to just do a quick recap just for those of us who maybe didn't join us at our first session or just kind of needs a refresher from the last time we got together. In episode 1, we highlighted sort of the quality of our data and how to improve the quality and governance, having a clear understanding of what you want to learn more about. Today, our focus is going to be on the quality and culture and establishing those super users, talk about that culture around sort of the use of data, talk a little bit about the technology that people are using and how we kind of get people excited about the use of data when maybe it's not a hot topic for some of us. In episode 3, which we'll be having in December, we're going to talk more about kind of the self-service and insights that you'll also be able to gather and how to kind of develop some of those insights that people can use. We'll talk more about that in our 3rd episode. But all right, now we're going to go ahead and dive into our topic for today, which is around understanding your data. But before we do that, we're going to do a quick poll. And I hope everyone will indulge me a little bit in providing some answers for our poll. So everyone should see this now. But how often do you let your gut feeling guide your decision making? You should be able to make a selection of either not at all, sometimes, we use data and gut feelings together, or the intuition is always used when determining next steps. So if you get a chance and can make your selections, I'll give you a minute or two here. All right, it looks like everyone has, oh, here we go. All right, we're going to close the poll. And it looks like we have about 50-50 for everyone. So we have 50% said sometimes, and 50% said we use the data and gut feelings together. So thank you for responding, and those are some good responses. Not that any response is a bad one, but what we're going to kind of get into now is when we talked about episode 1, we had talked about how we feel. You didn't want to get rid of your gut feeling because that's a big part of social work practice. But in today's world, we needed to be able to have concrete information to support that intuition, right? That's really important to have kind of both because they will support each other. So determining a baseline is really important when you're able to better understand the effectiveness of the changes that you're making. So basically the way this works is where you're using your gut is a really good tool in human services. It's a natural tool that we have as social workers. But combined with analytics, using your data, you can make decisions that are really powerful for a number of key reasons. The first reason is that you have the intuition that you have guides the analytics. So it will help you figure out the method or the observations that you want to make. It determines which data is relevant and which maybe doesn't really make sense. This is where your baseline comes in. The second reason why having both is important is that the analytics informs the intuition, where analytics can help you narrow what you look at and may guide you to places that you maybe didn't previously think about or observe. So you really do need both, and without balance on both sides, it can be easy to go down a rabbit hole. We've all been there. I know I have when we've kind of looked at some things in the past. it's very easy to kind of go off into different directions if you're not using both. So where we're seeing this impact in human services is that there's a combination of the intuition and the data analytics really then lead to sustainable changes, because you're really getting to those root causes of issues. And that's where data analytics is really changing the decision-making paradigm. So one example that we have here is around the therapy, parent-child interaction therapy. It's a great therapy. It's an evidence-based therapy that we use in Pennsylvania. Many other states use it as well. Many teams are trying to determine what supports will give the best outcome when focusing on parent and child interactions. And so they're seeing the skills in the families they're working with, but need programs that are both effective and accessible to parents in need and cost effective. They'll know that the programs that are structured in an evidence-based program are easy to follow and incorporate a whole family dynamic are ones that have the best possible outcome. Programs such as parent PCIT is often seen as difficult because of the rigidity of the therapy and the cost to implement. So this is not to say that when you implement this therapy that it's not effective. It's just that it's not as easy for families and practitioners and agencies to follow the model. And so when we look at data provided by ResearchGate, what they were saying was that in order to start up this type of therapy, it costs up to about $14,000 to start up the program for equipment and training. The cost from intake to discharge for a family is about $1,000 per client. So training alone for a therapist is also 40 hours of face-to-face training plus skills and coaching sessions. And so when you're looking at the cost base on an established budget, plus the training needed to implement and the time required by parents, this may not be the best option if you're living like in a rural county. And so the baseline of your agency budget, the number of available staff, the location of the program, and the current family needs would help you line up the starting point of your decision making. Using information along with the actual data, would lead you to look at other possible options since your budget may not be increasing. This confirmation affirms this decision. So by making this decision, you can avoid a costly mistake, plus save time that could be used to maybe take a look at another program option, maybe a mobile option to accommodate transportation needs. Maybe some better decision making is made where there is a balance of intuition and data. And so what we're looking here today and what we're talking about are real sustainable changes that can be implemented in today's practice. So we have another poll for you. Hope you're as excited as I am. All right, so here's our next poll. How many of you are currently trying to work through a change in your agency? And the answers are either yes or no, and there's no wrong answer. All right. We're going to close the poll. It looks like everyone has answered, and it looks like everyone is going through some type of change in your agency, which is good. It's good to have change. Change is always good, even though sometimes it could be hard. But it definitely provides a good measure and conversation for today. So again, I want to thank Lisa for joining us today when we were considering the possibilities of making the shift from using your gut to beginning to use data to inform decision making. I could not think of a better example than the work that's happening with the team up in Lackawanna County. So let's set the stage here, Lisa. You are a Class 3 county with about 4,000 referrals in the year 2019. You have an average of 184 cases on average. But over the last couple of years, your county has really begun to dive into database decision-making and data analytics by continually finding ways to collect, analyze, and collectively discuss the data and what trends you're seeing by using your data. Throughout our series, we've been trying to normalize the use of information that's being collected and to figure out ways in which it could be used to improve how an agency functions and how we're working with our families. So as we're preparing for our discussion today, one quote really stuck out at me from our conversations that we've had, which was the team needed to learn from their mistakes, that data provided a way for the team to reflect and to do it right the first time. So as you got started down this data quest to know more, what were you seeing in your practice at the agency that made you decide that it might be time to make a change?
Sure. We're going to just take it back a little bit
Sure.
in time, just to kind of, say maybe 15 years ago, when a lot of what we were pulling in as far as data and information was agency-based, and that overall look at the agency rather than right down to the caseworker and the case management side of it. So from there is where we started building. We are very fortunate that our director is very data driven. So we were able to, he was able to provide us with a lot of the equipment, the technology, and we have just grown from there. And this has been our kind of our path. So we started out just overall researching, using evidence-based programs, determining from there we wanted to see, are these effective? Are these programs effective? Is what we're doing effective? How do we even know this? So those are the questions we started asking ourselves as an agency. We did become part of an initiative, the Child Welfare Demonstration Project for Pennsylvania, which kind of actually gave us a fast track on how to do this. It was utilizing preventative measures, using our 4E dollars for preventative measures rather than for foster care. So we were part of the larger federal demonstration project for that resulted in actually the passing of the Family First Act and reduction of congregate care. At that time, we had reduced congregative care completely. Residential treatments, we don't use those anymore. We haven't in over a decade. So, but I'll get there. So fast forward, we became part of the demonstration project, utilizing assessment tools on assessing cases, and then looking at, getting that data, looking at those assessments at a larger level, kind of to determine, how we were assessing even as an agency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Leading us up now to analytics.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And you guys have really come, like you said, you come a long way from starting out kind of even, thinking about, hey, what do we collect? How can we look at it? How could we use it to now, looking at different ways in which you can use the data in different ways, how you can inform different pieces. And I think that sort of brings me to my next question, which was really around, when you're making this kind of change within your agency, you're starting from that baseline, right? Like we just talked about. And so how did your team feel about data? Were they skilled at using the data? Did they use it in their practice? Kind of what did that look like for them?
So with any kind of change, you have to get the buy-in and the understanding. We're also lucky we have a really good work staff. They kind of let us, they'll fight us when they need to, but for the most part, they've been pretty good about learning and understanding. It is a little difficult for caseworkers in the sense of, they have their own job that they need to do, and they don't always get tied up in the understanding of the data. So in the beginning, it was a little tough, and it was that trying to get that buy-in and kind of move away from that gut decision making, as you talked about. That is part of it, kind of saying to them, okay, how do you know this happened? And they'll just say, you know, well, we know. Well, yes, their experience, the years of experience, things they do know, but they couldn't name it.
Mm-hmm.
So retraining how to name it through the data was a big focus in the beginning. You know, what is it that you are doing when you're there? What is it that you're seeing? You know, taking that, you know, natural gut instinct and putting names to it through the data.
Right, right. And I think that when I had talked to Lori at one point, she was saying, you know, we're kind of like living by the stats. So we're living by that data that we're, you know, that we're naming, and we're saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. We're really living by what that concrete information is, to in combination with, you know, your gut and some of the other pieces that we use for decision making, is really kind of helping us get to, you know, kind of the root causes of information, you know, root causes of issues and things. And so, you know, our strategies are probably a little bit more on point than maybe in the past.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And then also from there, you know, you then go to the next question, you know, because you have that base data. Now you say to them, like, okay, what's the next question? What's the next step now that we know what this initial one is?
Right, right. And so I know that when we have talked before, you know, you're talking about, hey, we're using data actively in meetings. We're trying to incorporate it anywhere that we can. And you guys started with kind of the daily statistics report. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what that was all about, and how did it get started and how it was used?
Yeah, that was our director and our fiscal director. They do a daily report. It started well over probably a decade now, and it was not received well. Because as we know, statistics, right? Your data is very transparent, so it may tell you, you know, all the things you're doing wrong as well. So it wasn't received initially well, right? Everyone felt that they were going to be in trouble if their cases were, you know, overdue, or if, you know, it really showed kind of caseload sizes and who was turning what. But it really was meant as a way to guide the agency. You know, here's what's happening. Here's how many children we have in placement. Here's how many, here's each unit's workload. Here's how many maybe referrals that have gone over their 30 or 60 day mark. You know, we had to rein that in. And the only way we knew how to do that was to put out these reports, right? So everyone sees it in black and white in front of them, like, you know, and so we really did kind of firm up the workflow really with them. And then we still use them every day. And it did become to a point where all of staff relies on looking at those daily reports. To see where we're all at, you know, and if we're progressing, and if something is coming close to being due, that type of thing. So it really is a part of our work life now. You know, there were times I think the fiscal officer was off and people were panicking, like they're just putting out the stats today, right?
Well, and that's
your culture,
right, and that's where you really know, like, you're making you're making some sustainable changes when people are actively searching and actively looking for that report, or that, you know, that tool that now you've kind of ingrained in the culture of what you do.
And it was slow going in the beginning, you know, but over time, you know, it is part of our culture now.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really great example, Lisa, because, you know, when we're talking about, you know, how people can implement this, right? We often hear about, like, the whole accountability piece that people feel. And really how you have to kind of change the way you're viewing data, not as like an I gotcha, but more of a tool that is need for everyone to kind of improve and kind of change the way that view is then made within the agency is really important.
It was very important to, you know, this wasn't about, you know, putting fear into people, maybe a little, but not.
Because that's not the driving force, Lisa.
No, I'm only kidding. You know, it's about the accountability piece to a degree as well.
Yeah.
You know, we're all accountable for the work that we do, right? You know, and our bottom line is to make sure that we are serving our children, to make sure they're not harmed by things that we may or may not be doing within our own agency. But it was never about, a gotcha. It's more about, okay, here's what's happening in our agency. Here's what's happening every day. Looking at if there are those problems, then how do we fix them? What do we do to fix them? And using the data, as to create an environment in the agency where there's transparency and there's accountability, but looking at it more from a higher level that what created those problems then,
right?
What created those? Because they just, if the employee's having difficulty with something had to create it. So it's using that data to look at that, what internal issues are going on that we need to change, to make sure that our workers are successful.
Right. It's really getting to some of those root cause issues of things that are happening.
Yeah.
So here's an example of like referrals received by day. So when you guys had decided on the information, that you wanted to kind of go down this path, and it doesn't have to be exactly this particular example, but I think this is kind of an interesting one. But how did you decide on like the information that you needed to collect? And how has it changed some of the work that that you're doing at the referral level?
Well, now some of these reports that predate me. Because I started, I wasn't in this position then. I was a clinical worker, I believe, when they started this. So I wasn't part of what that initial conversation was and what they determined they wanted to see. I do know our director had certain things he wanted to see every day to keep. That was his way of keeping track of what was happening within the agency on any given day. So having referrals received by day, what's coming in every day, what's coming in every week, what's coming in, how many, as you can see here, the GPS referrals coming in, CPS referrals. From there, we take a look at, okay, so how does the workflow go from there? Case workflow, workloads, types of cases, types of allegations. We just start digging deeper with our initial reports like these.
So did you, like, when you looked at things like this, like in the case of, where you're seeing here, like, especially for 2019, it looks like a, bigger dip, but, did you change resources on particular days because you saw, we tend to get more referrals during a Wednesday than on, a Saturday?
That's a newer stat that we've been kind of watching over time, right? To see how that works and do we need to do that? Because that was something last year that we had discussed. Unfortunately, COVID hit in the middle of, moving a little bit more forward this past winter in some of these. But yes, that was something we had discussed, like, do we need to shift units? Do we need to shift staff? If we're receiving more referrals, who are they coming from? Why are they coming at particular times? Why are we receiving, it could be something as simple as, on a Wednesday at, 10 in the morning, we're receiving a bulk of referrals from school districts, and that could be one of the reasons, but why is that then? Is that their time period that they're allowed to?
Yeah.
Until you really start looking at, the mandated reporters and things like that. But it does help us take a look at, staffing wise, so we look at the referrals on the weekends, right? So we have 2 people that are on call on weekends. If the referrals start increasing, we may need to increase staff on call so that they're not, because it's more of an emergent type response.
Right.
So it helps guide that type of issue as well, because if we see over time that our referrals are increasing, then we know we have to increase staff.
Right. Now, you talked a little bit about kind of the reasons, reasons like that referrals might come in. And I think this one is kind of interesting where you have kind of the reasons for screen outs. How are referrals then being proactively diverted to resources maybe in the community when there aren't child welfare issues identified?
We have a screening unit, and the screening unit is with caseworkers, right? Skilled caseworkers, educated caseworkers, who make that determination when they receive either the call directly or it comes through Childline or the report comes in. They do an initial safety assessment, so to speak, on the referrals. And if it is not a rise to the level of our laws, our CPSL, or child abuse and neglect, then we make the referrals to other agencies that would be assisting them.
So maybe over time, what you'll probably begin to see then is like, for this one here, where you have for the DPS, you have the referral to community resources, that over time, if we looked at this based off of, number of months and things like that, you'd be able to begin to see, maybe that would begin to increase if there were more cases that would be screened out, and then they'd have referrals to community services.
And over time too, when you're looking at that, those ones that we do refer, take a look at the resources that we do have available based on the types of calls that we're getting in. So,
Right.
We have a whole housing unit, if we're getting a lot of homelessness calls, they go now to, because we have a housing coordinating unit. But prior to that, we would have to redirect to the community. That's where we found the need within the agency for this. We have a need to collaborate with the community, based on, the information that we receive from the data.
Right, which is great. I mean, I think that the more that you can use the data to help with that collaboration, I think that's just great for both the agency, but it also, brings in the community into some of these, larger kind of community issues, and helps connect resources that, make more sense than having to be fully involved into child welfare.
Right, because homelessness is not indicative of child abuse and neglect.
Right.
I mean, obviously, there's if there's litigating factors that created it, then that's different. But poor isn't necessarily a child welfare neglect issue.
Right.
So
right.
You can collaborate with the community to do that. That's what we want to do.
Right. So this is an example here of referrals by team. Now, has this helped you in kind of managing the referrals as they're coming into the system, into the agency? If you're noting that certain units are getting sort of hit harder than others, are you able to kind of shift things around between the teams?
When they come in our agency, we have a rotation, right? That's handled by the team. So this would be more of a administrative report, because we're not using this one to do daily management of the referrals. That's handled on a rotation basis within the units. We'll take a look at this and say, okay, today, what's going on here, point in time. You have team 3 intake. They've got, higher amount coming in, but that could be because team 2 intake, maybe they're short some people. So it was adjusted, so that the extra work went to the larger unit. So those are the things that we'll take a look at, and we'll know that. But, it'll also tell us if there are, blaring issues coming in. If we notice that each day the school liaison unit is increasing in their referrals, then we'll take a look at the referrals and say, hey, what's going on here? So it gives us it's that quick look and to see if there is an issue. Do we need to look at something, or are we managing workflow okay? Right.
And I think that that's a really good point that you're making, is that so data analytics, it's a great tool to use for human services and for child welfare, for sure. But depending on the parameters that you pick for your particular visualization, it can be just a point in time. And it sometimes will tell the story that's sort of behind the scenes. But it's that, the backstory is some of the stuff that kind of informs what you're seeing on the graph. So it's it's never an only, it's like a with, kind of thing. Yeah. So where your team is really making the jump from checking the box of the traditional sort of, did I do it, did I not do it, and really moving into kind of the quality of your work, how has using data affected casework measurements or improved their work? And has there been like a change in maybe motivation of your staff?
Motivation as far as, sorry.
Like motivation to use the data for their work, or for just improvement of work, those kinds of things.
So we're still moving towards that. As you know, we're building the dashboard, the analytics dashboard that hopefully will be in our case management system, ACES, for daily use by the workers as well as the supervisors. Prior to all of this, the data that they do use is what's generated from maybe the assessments that they're using, and then kind of understanding that the assessments, will guide and drive their work. If they use the tools and if they use the data gathered from it, it's to help make those decisions rather than all the decision be based on just what the caseworker may be seeing at that point in time. So completing the assessments, having teaming meetings, all of that discussion around the data of what they received back helps case planning, right? And the case planning goes into what the family needs to be a part of, and then what they need to accomplish throughout the life of the case. So using that data initially and driving the cases kind of takes that burden off that individual caseworker. And it gives more of a teaming approach. So yes, and the timeliness of work. So those are all the things I look at.
Right.
The timeliness of their work, those regulatory pieces that, unfortunately are so stressful for them, but we have to oblige them. So those are the reports that I'll run to make sure that this is happening. And then if it's not happening, then we figure out, we go down a little deeper and we figure out, okay, is this again an agency issue? Is this a unit issue, down to whether it's a caseworker issue? And then we figure that out, and then we put those plans into place to resolve the issues.
Yeah.
It really does drive our practice in that sense, of improvement.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're talking about is that you're using the information to not be the sole factor of decision making or changes that are made, but it's like the starting conversation. So if you're beginning to see kind of these changes that are happening, good or bad, you want to be able to take the information to kind of help fuel either crucial conversations that you might need to have with a worker, or celebrating like successes that you're making because placements are reduced. But you're using it to help inform like your next decisions, and that is really the more that you're doing that, your decision making becomes more consistent, which is helpful for everyone in the agency when they know kind of how things are going to be decided, what's the process, and there's some uniformity or predictability around it.
Consistency, sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing that you had talked about that I thought was really good, and when we're talking about those that are doing casework, is that the data is meant really for to help caseworkers do their work better. So to help support the work that they're doing, not to make it harder, but to make it easier. And so as long as there is this cultural drive within the agency to do those things and to use the information to do that, then the more the information gets used and the more that the tools get used, and the burden begins to lift a little bit. It's not perfect, but it's, it kind of begins to get that ball rolling.
It does get the ball rolling, and it's kind of, if you go back to what I said, it names it, right? It names what's happening in the family. There used to be a time way back when, it was the same issues, right? Parenting, drug and alcohol, or, here it elaborates it more, it gives us more detail, and it names it for them. Here's what you're seeing it. Here's what you need to do now, because that's what the data is telling us. And, they get to sit back and go, okay, all right, I see that now. I see what's happening. They may just be naming there's a drug and alcohol problem, but now we've drilled down to, with the questions we've asked on assessment, things like that, where does that problem lie, and where does it lie in the functioning of the family, that type of thing. So it answers the next questions for them and is a good guide. The data is a good guide case plan.
Yeah, yeah. So data, like we had talked about, can be used not only for monitoring a program and program outcomes, but it also can be used for assist in managing budgets. Now, I know, Lisa, that you're not involved in like the budget making, but I think that this was kind of an interesting way in which you guys are using your data. So I hope we can talk about this a little bit. But when you're using the data within the system, how was it for the team to be able to use sort of the data that was put into the system for like the needs-based budget plan?
Say that again. I'm sorry. My phone.
So that's okay. That's all right.
Okay.
So when you're using your data that you've had in the system and now you have the ability to kind of pull it out and be able to look at it for like needs-based budget planning, how have you been able to use that and how has it assisted, your leadership team in kind of planning for this year's budget?
Well, that's it's exactly what you just said. It's for the planning, right? Mm-hmm. So we know what we're looking at as far as say, our trends or what's happening in our community, what programs we might want to be starting, what ones we know might not be effective. We have some evidence-based programs that we've been running long-term and they have a lot of evidence behind them and they've been great. So those are things we look at too. Do we continue this service? Do we not? Is it effective in our agency? So it helps with the budgeting of what's next, and not just what we're, continuing to do now, but what can we do next now, as we learn more from everything that we're gathering. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, I was going to say, I think that the what people are finding is that the more that they're putting in information into the system and using it for things like needs-based reporting or even just, quarterly reporting that you're doing, the more that we're putting into the system, the more then you're able to pull out and really look at, hey, here are the trends that have happened over the last, few years. Here are some things that we're seeing that are coming. And maybe even helping predictive measure of, okay, we want to make sure we have, X number of funding for this IL program because, we are seeing that we're having more kids coming in at this age. So I think it's helping you not only kind of monitor throughout the year because you're able to do that check whenever you're wanting to do that throughout the year, but also being able to kind of predict what might be coming up because you're able to see data that's happened kind of over the long term, which I think is can be really helpful, especially where there's not a lot of money.
Yeah. That's true.
Just the reality of things these days. Yeah, exactly.
The dollars effectively.
Yes, exactly. We got to stretch them as long as we can. So let's talk about how you've used data to inform crucial conversations around practice. So we talked a little bit about like the use of assessments, and the safety assessment is certainly a standard requirement for PA practice. You guys use a lot of the FAST and CANS assessments as well. Stopgaps, we talked a little bit about how root causes are often found when you're reviewing kind of the process at a supervisor and also CWIS levels, digging deeper into the numbers, help find that root cause issue that we have. Do you feel that you have a deeper understanding behind the numbers now that your teams are using the data a little bit more effectively?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Sometimes it even lends to even more. Okay, I've seen enough. You really can go on and on, right? And you have to make sure that whatever it is you're looking at, from a quality assurance standpoint, I could really dig deep, but I have to make sure that I don't go too far because everything has to be within the practice and the realm of the ability of us to be able to do the work, but an example of something could be as simple as, you're looking at zip codes, right? And you're pulling out drug use, and what other choices of drug and which area in the counties see the highest levels, say, of meth or alcohol or and then we know that we collaborate more with our providers to say, hey, we're seeing a trend over here in this town more so now than, so all of those guide, what we're doing, and make it a little bit more transparent as you have here to be able to keep the kids safe when we can see where the problems are.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So, and here is a sort of an example of some of what you might be able to see, like when we were looking at even like the timing of when reviews are being done and using kind of the data to be able to look at the flow of practice, right, around safety assessment reviews. These are just like examples of, hey, this is sort of where things are getting sort of bottled in the process. When we're looking at an agency, how does that, how is that affecting the overall work that's being done and things along that line? When we're talking about sort of that overall impact on the agency, you guys are really big with QSR. We've been really moving on kind of implementing timelines and making sure that things are done the way that they should be, both within your agency, but also kind of following the, the guidelines from the state. So how has this contributed? So how has the use of data contributed to kind of a drive on agency improvement?
So the more we've used the data, and as far as our technology, the increase in technology, the ability to run reports quicker, takes you away from that long hours of manual work. So it makes it a lot easier to pull all that information now and be able to actually sit and do what we want to do with the data versus spending most of the time trying to just gather it, So for our QSR, we rely heavily on our QSR. It's the data we receive from that tells us, how we're overall, how is our practice, how is our agency doing? If there are things that we're lagging behind on, then we make those changes. So we do. In fact, this year is 2021. We're actually QSR year. So we're just now in the planning stages of it. And it's very different because of COVID, and trying to figure out how are we going to do this now, given the circumstances. What I like about the QSR, and I always say, like, I think everyone should try to be a QSR reviewer, because for whatever county, because that you walk in and you review a case from start to finish, and it really gives you those aha moments through it. So when you're a worker or a supervisor, you're in the thick of the case. But when you get to be on the outside and take that long look at it from start to finish, it really does impact you on what we're doing, right? I remember one review I did for another county, and the girl was moved 20-something times within the life of the case.
Wow.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So that tells that county, whoa, how did this happen? Because sometimes when you're in it, you don't realize those moves are happening as much as they are, So that's what QSR, like, it shines the light on those type of things that we want to resolve. And like you said, it helps identify the gaps, and then taking that data that we receive from them and moving forward with it and making changes in the agency.
Right. And I think that's I think you make some really good points on like how you can use data either through the QSR if that's a direction your county likes to take, or if even it's through some other type of assessment process. I think that it's really important to not let that report kind of just be put up on a shelf and never to be looked at again until the next time you do it, but really make it be kind of that living document that helps you actually make some improvements. In one of those areas that I know that you guys have been working on has been, improving like father engagement. It's a national, issue that that states are looking at. It's a Pennsylvania issue that, we've been viewed as sort of area needing improvement from the last CFSR. But, what were you seeing in the data when you decided to pursue an improvement in like father engagement? Because you guys have been doing it for a while.
Really long time. I think it
Yeah.
was one of our first QSRs that was highlighted.
Mhm.
You know, it was kind of a bit shocking, I think, at the time for us. We were like, wow, you know, because once it's in front of you, right, there's no denying it, right? The transparency's there. But it also kind of was like a, you know, aha moment, a wake up saying, oh, we need to do something here. You know, so we made structural changes internally, as well as, you know, I mean, of course, the state, you know, we have all the laws and initiatives for it. And structurally, we made policies around it, you know, to increase our workers engaging the fathers, finding them, diligent searches. We have internal policies as well for diligent searches, adding fathers onto the FSPs in permanency team meetings. You know, it's always discussed, you know, is dad here? Is dad part of this? You know, what's going on with that? So it's all part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then we monitor it. You know, I run, my data clerk keeps a monitoring on our FSPs every month, and we take a look at the engagement, father engagement. We take a look at, you know, a lot of regulatory pieces just to keep on top of those things.
Right, right. And I think that that monitoring piece is a piece that, you know, when we're looking at a lot of implementations that happen in child welfare and really, frankly, most human services, we seem to have kind of this gap where we're really great at planning, we're really great at like setting things up.
Yeah.
We're pretty good at like implementing, but that monitoring piece is something that is not always kind of followed up on, which is really where like that sustainable change can really happen for programs. So your county is pretty committed to like FAST and CANS. How are you using the data from these assessments to kind of drive the progress that you're having with families?
So we're in the process of kind of reassessing that in our use of the FAST and CANS, because we started as a demonstration project, like I said, and the demonstration project ended about a year ago. So we were committed at that point with that specific assessment that we're using. But we do know that Prayed Foundation, the one who created the FAST and CANS, has a lot of other different assessments that go along with the FAST and the CANS. So we've spent time deciding, you know, are we going to have some add-ons? What are we going to do? We're reevaluating with ACES, right, with Infomatrix on kind of revamping and redoing what the assessments that we have. And so what we've traditionally been using the assessments for is to drive the case planning. And then an overall assessment of how the agency is doing as far as strengths and needs. What issues do we see around, you know, in our community, in our agency, and on that small level, at case level, you know, a FAST is completed on every family coming into our agency, and then there's teaming meetings that happen. The assessments, and they're assessment driven. So the result of that assessment, and then over time, you know, if the case is open with us, you know, then they get reevaluated as per the 6 months. And then we start taking a look, kind of like what you're having here. Over time, what are we seeing? Are we seeing progress? Are we seeing progress within the family? Are we seeing, and this will tell us here. So as you have here, like Allison and Alyssa, right? So on this first involvement, she received a 0, but on the next assessment, it looks like she received a 2. So that's a little bit of a problem. So what's happening here, right? So we get to take a look at those types of things that kind of make us question what's, you know, take a look at the case better, you know, or are we seeing the progress? And so, and that identifies the progress for us.
Right. So I think what it's really beginning to show for folks is that, you know, when you're using those assessments and you're actually using the information from those assessments, you can really sort of tie then into, okay, this is what we're working on. These are the services that we're putting in, and this is what the outcome is likely to be and actually what it is. And so when you're having kind of this remeasurement, then after you've put in the service in place, you're able to kind of take a look at, did it work or did it not work? make changes based off of that. So it becomes then sort of that foundational information that helps you make some decisions and really narrow in your focus, because maybe it's not this the specific service that's in place, but maybe it's a provider. Maybe they don't have the resources that they need, or some other, kind of issue that's kind of showing up based on the data that you're able to show.
And that's another thing down the line that we're going to be looking at as well. From what you just said, are the providers effective?
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing effective? Do we have the families in the right treatment?
Mm-hmm.
Should they be in that? So that's what all this shows us.
Yeah.
And then hopefully eventually we'll get to measure, how effective some of the services are.
Right. Here's just another example, just to kind of give folks a kind of an idea of some of the other, work that you're doing just around engagement, when you're looking at, how are current and concurrent goals being used, mm-hmm. and are we having, more kids that are, living with relatives, or are we still having a lot that are in placement, like, in out of home placement, and how are those relating? So I think this is just another good example of how, if I can visually see it, it's a little bit easier for those of us who maybe are more visual learners. Mm-hmm. I can kind of see it on paper. It's right there in front of me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on the visual. I think we're all visual that way. It's much easier to see.
Yeah, exactly. So based on your lessons learned data journey that it's still underway, it's never going to stop. No. What would you say are some of the takeaways so far?
For us and for what?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Through this process, I think, well, we always say, it's the data that goes in, right? So the data that goes in has to be as accurate as it can be, because if you don't have accuracy in the data, right, then what you're getting back is not going to be fruitful. Mm-hmm. So there is, when we talk about a takeaway, that's probably one of the biggest things that I have to kind of have been working on the last several years, is just cleaning up data, making sure that the data that's in there is the validity of it all, finding pieces where people might not be doing that as effectively, and putting something in place so that they do. Mm-hmm. Because in their daily grind, they're busy. It's not an easy job being a caseworker. It's not an easy job being a supervisor. So how do we make this work for both of us, right? How do we collect the data as, best as we can without it really impeding their workflow? Mm-hmm. And that's, and the other takeaway would be, it's using data to drive your practice, that gives you that base. It mm-hmm. gives you that base. Nothing is ever set in stone. Data isn't perfect either, right? Just like it's as good as what you're getting in. So you really have to make sure that you're taking a look at it and it's as valid as it can be. Right.
I think that those are really great kind of lessons learned that I think everyone mm-hmm. can kind of take away from, because I think, some of the things that you're talking about, even just today, where, we had to learn about how to take data, and were we looking at it the same way? Mm-hmm. We had to know that it wasn't always perfect. And so mm-hmm. it gave us some information, but was not the only deciding factor in things that we used. But man, it really gave us a good heads up as to, maybe yes. where we needed to look more, into, or have more conversation around, to kind of make some changes that would really matter. Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're talking about understanding your data and kind of using it in practice, so far we've talked about how we've identified problems, we've created statements around, hey, this is what I want to do when I look at some sort of trend. We've also explored kind of gaps and root analysis, and we talked about that our last session. but then we also have been kind of considering a statement, like what kind of question do I want to answer? What do I want data to help inform? And are there any pieces that are missing? And so we talked a little bit about that, about, hey, if I'm going to solve these kinds of issues, I need to look at this piece of information or that piece of information, because they might tell me more about the story, about what's happening. And being really specific about what you're trying to accomplish will help you get there. And so, some of the things that I always, when we're talking with some of our counties and the people that we work with, we sort of remind everyone that it's nothing is ever perfect. So it's not going to be the one thing that's going to make it all work and everything is going to be great. But if you keep looking for ways to use what you have to show what's working well and what you may need to change, it's going to help you get closer than you are today. And that having sort of champions, people who really enjoy working in data and keep wanting to move it forward, like Lisa and her team, are really important to kind of having some of that sustainability that will happen over time, because sometimes you're going to have not so great days when it comes to data collection. Sometimes people are just not going to want to do it, and you have to be kind of okay with that and sort of meet them where they are and keep encouraging them to keep moving forward. And I always use like the phrase, like, what can I do by next Tuesday? You need to keep things small. So when you're making these changes, like, think about things that you can make that are small changes that'll help you kind of keep moving it forward. And nothing can be really that big if you only have till next Tuesday, is what I always think. But that's just how I look at it. So yeah. So I wanted just open it up for questions, if anyone has any, before we close out today. I know we're a little over time today. Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions today, Lisa, which means we've covered everything, and it was really fantastic. So if you like what we're doing here with InfoMatrix, with our webinar series, we just encourage you to get the word out, share it with your peers and your fellow workers. Let them know that we've got these great webinars that will hopefully help give you some great information and help you move things forward and just help you support in the work that you're doing. But I wanted to thank Lisa for joining us today and lending us her time. I really, really appreciate it. And I think that what we talked about today was really going to help others. So thank you for being a willing participant in our webinar series. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the invite, Andrea. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So our next webinar is up in December. We're going to take a little break for a little bit of the holiday, and we'll be back December 9th, where we talk about how we can use our data to tell the story. And we have special guests that will join us that we'll announce pretty soon. And so we hope that you'll join us. But thank you. And you guys have a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.